Hello, hello. My name is Chris. I'm a former member of a Korean cult named Shincheonji. And today I'm going to be talking about something that actually not so many people, especially in the counter cult world, talk about. It's how to actually heal. Think about it. You guys were most likely inside of a high control group for maybe a few months, 6 months, maybe for a few years, like me, or maybe you were a leader for, say, I don't know, 10, 20 years. Over the last few years of my life, I've been helping a lot of people leave cults, whether it's Shincheonji or the World Mission Society Church of God. I even assisted some people leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses and even Jesus Morning Star on accident. And regardless of the cult that you left, I've noticed a repeating pattern of how to help the person reconcile not only their faith, but also their physical health. In this episode, in this live stream, I'm going to try to using my own personal experiences and the experiences of others who I've observed through YouTube testimonies, TikTok, and personal friendships. I'm going to give you guys some helpful tips. A lot of times when people are talking about cults, there's always like Netflix documentaries. They talk about the evil horrors, about how what the cult has done, but rarely do I ever see the same Netflix documentary talk about the life after. And not everyone's meant to be, how do I say, like speaking out against cults. Not everyone has that calling. And when you do leave a high control group or cult, you don't have to do what me and the many others have done, whether it's raising awareness about Shincheonji, just talking about Shincheonji or the World Mission Society to your pastor, and just raising basic awareness alone would do wonders. So I'm going to give you practical steps. The target audience right now are people who just left or are on the fence of leaving. And the very practical steps of what you can do today to soften the impact and the blow. I'm just going to call this the healing steps. We're going to go through the slide deck together, okay? And then eventually, probably within the next upcoming week, I'm going to also upload the document on closer look. And I also, like I promised before, I'm going to also upload the locations of the SEJ churches. One caveat, I'm not going to leak their addresses because it's not my place to do that and things like that. But I will at least give out the city and maybe even their current membership. And how do I know this? Through the works of many other people. So, a brief review of the immediate steps. So, let's say you just left Shincheonji, you just woke up and you realize, okay, this is all a lie. When I realized it, it felt very overwhelming for me. It felt as though my entire world view just broke and just shattered. That is a very normal feeling. For me, I felt this weird, sudden urge of both joy and peace and terrifying realization that what I was in was just all a lie. It turns out it's because there's this thing called confusion and identity shock. You have to recall when you're in these high control groups, regardless of what they are, I'm going to focus on Shincheonji, but this can easily be applied to any other group out there. Your entire identity is being shooken because you truly believed at one point that this group had the highest truth. And now what you're going to have to do is essentially rip it out. And as you rip it out, your core identity is now going to be attacked. It's not going to be an easy process. If you've been paying attention to my previous episodes, for people on the outside who are trying to help the loved one, this is why I always make an emphasis on ask questions to get the person to think. Because the moment that you try to attack and say, hey, this is a cult, why are you so stupid, etc., that's no longer just attacking the cult, but you're also attacking the person's core identity. The last few years, the hardest part for me for healing was really actually replacing that identity that I lost with something healthier. And I've been out of SEJ since July of 2021. It will take time. It will be a long process. It won't be an overnight type of healing, if that kind of makes sense. So the first step is write down the reasons why you're leaving. You're going to have doubts about like whether or not you made the right choice. Write it down, and whenever you're feeling panicky and thinking to yourself if you did the wrong thing or not, when you write down the reasons why you are leaving, you can then review it, and it needs to be in your own words. I can provide you resources that exist, Closer Look Initiative, the Reddit r/Shincheonji, and many other excellent resources. But the reason why it's important for you to write it down is so that it can be within your own voice, your own language, your own whatever, so that in a way you can make it your own. So here are some of the reasons why I left Shincheonji. I got to witness the COVID-19 Revelation 7 changes and failed prophecies. Now, I know SCJ has their current set of excuses for these failed prophecies, but in the time they were developing it, and they're even today, I would argue their excuses are not good. And then there's a lot of other reasons why I left Shincheonji. Every single verse in the Bible that talked about what a false teacher or prophet would do, SCJ would mimic almost immediately. One of the famous verses would actually be Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 to 23. So in Matthew 7:21, it actually talks about not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Ironically, when you look at the context of that verse, Jesus is actually talking about people following false pastors, false teachers, and they will approach you like a wolf in sheep's clothing. When we review SEJ's methodology of recruiting, they make a heavy emphasis on this use called the wisdom of hiding, where the wisdom of hiding is essentially how they redefine what a lie is. They would quote Revelation 22:18 to 19, saying that a lie is only when you add and subtract to God's word. It's a spiritual lie. And that as long as you're doing it for God's kingdom, it doesn't count, so to speak. Ironically, if you think about their own definition of this wisdom of hiding, they are taking away from what it means to lie. And therefore, they're actually technically lying themselves. Even if we disregard that, there are verses like 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2, where Paul explicitly condemns any form of deception or any twisting of God's word to evangelize. Then we see in 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, where people are secretly introducing their destructive heresies. Likewise with Jude chapter 1, verses 3 to 4. An interesting thing about Jude chapter 1, verse 3 is how salvation was already given to the Christians 2,000 years ago. And it's interesting, and I point that out because if salvation was already possible 2,000 years ago, why do we logically need another person, another promised pastor? Even though the tree of life and eternal salvation was already given to the Christians 2,000 years. That's why in Philippians chapter 3, the author of Philippians is talking about how we already have citizenship in heaven, how we are just awaiting for Christ's return so that we can partake in the first resurrection. Now, going back to the idea of what these passages are all describing, is it's always a heavy emphasis on secrecy and deception. What does Shincheonji do? Well, there's a lot of well-documented cases, news, testimonies of former members all over the world, from Australia to the United States to Vancouver, Canada to Europe, whether it's in Germany or the UK, that all are saying, I was deceived and tricked into a Bible study. And so these passages are always going to be talking about patterns to watch out for, and Shincheonji fits the bill. Okay, next step. After you write this down, including some of the examples that I gave, before leaving, build a support network, whether it's a girlfriend, a family member, friends, whatever, whether it's in person or online. Try to build out that support network, because at least for me, there are days where I had full-blown panic attacks where I was like, oh no, and I just needed someone on the outside looking in to reassure and give me comfort and reasoning and rationale that yes, I made the right choice. Yes, Shincheonji is crazy. Yes, they're clearly a cult. And so Because the idea is we are social creatures. We are meant to be in groups. We are meant to be in societies. If you try to do this lone wolf, it's possible, but it's going to be very difficult. And then if you lack any support, let's say you don't know anyone who, like a call list of friends or whatever, you can always reach out to me, and you can always reach out to actually another aspect of it as well. We have this thing called the Bible Vaccine Center. So over the last year, I got to do a lot of videos with Pastor Yang. So Pastor Yang and I are working together with many others to kind of provide a network support of both pastors and former members like myself. And the idea is this: I'm trying to get more people connected with more who actually know about Shincheonji in depth instead of maybe a shallow level understanding. And then Pastor Yang has been doing this for over 10 years. He knows what he's doing. And then there's also Pastor Ezra as well. You can connect with him. I'm about to hopefully share the emails. Here you go. So it's Chris at examiningthecults.org and info at biblevaccinecenter.org. Okay, we are giving you these email resources. Reach out to us. We don't mind answering questions. We'll get to you as soon as we can. It is a volunteer org. We're not getting paid for this. And the idea is so that we can either connect you with other people in the area who experience Korean high control groups, especially Shincheonji or the World Mission Society Church of God, or we can at least have an online community. There's already existing Reddits like r/Shincheonji. Definitely take advantage of that as well. So the next step. So you wrote down why you think SEJ is wrong. You are convinced by it. You have a support network of some kind, whether it's online or in person. The next step is, okay, so what do you do to actually leave? What I personally did was I chose a date to leave, meaning that I wrote down, okay, this date in July will be my last Sunday service, and I'm going to go ahead and stick to it. This is a very difficult step. For those who are on the outside looking in, maybe you don't understand because you're like, oh, well, it's a cult. Who cares? You have to remember your loved one or family member or whoever, friend, this was their entire life. This is almost their entire network of friends and community and identity that they are leaving behind. They're about to embrace a brave new world that's completely different from what they've been used to and conditioned to over the last few years. Now, when it comes to saying goodbye, normally what I did was I was a lot more indirect about it, sure. And another thing too is this: when you do leave and when you say your goodbyes, whatever that looks like, expect a lot of emotional pressure from the people on the outside. The reason why this will happen by emotional pressure, meaning that they're going to bombard you with text messages, they're going to maybe show up unannounced to your door. They're going to try to do everything in their power to try to stop you from leaving. They genuinely believe that they're trying to save you. I've had a lot of people over the years in the UK. There's this gal, I forgot her name. She actually got the Shincheonji group banned from the university because they were essentially stalking her. And the reason being is, from the Shincheonji perspective, is they're trying to save you. They're trying to protect you, pull you out from the fire back into safety. And so they will feel justified in trying to stop you. This is indoctrination, not malice. This is not a place from hatred, but this is something that you have to keep in mind. So when you leave, this is not official legal advice, but this is what I did, and this is what many have done in the past. When you leave, they will try to call you and text you. Sometimes blocking them temporarily might be the best first step. Just kind of saying, listen, I want nothing to do with you. I kind of said I'm not interested. I'm going to temporarily put you on mute. And then afterwards, let's say that they show up to your workplace or your house unannounced. That's where you need to take a firm stand and then say, I am not interested in Shincheonji or World Mission Society Church of God. Please leave me alone. And then tell them firmly if you need to. This is sometimes what others have done, and what I've done as well is say, hey, if you try to stalk or harass me of any kind, I will file a police report. Now, for my for my experience for helping others, this is what I've told other people. If you need to say that, so be it. And again, this is not legal advice. This is just, how do I say, things that I've seen others do. And then if they still continue harassing you, then maybe it is necessary to file that police report as well. Normally, what I found though is that after the first firm standing up for yourself, they normally will leave you alone. And you have to remember, they're not doing it out of malice or hatred. They're doing it because they genuinely think that you're trying to save you. Now, the separation between you and the cult is necessary. One of my coworkers, to open up actually, and I think this is honestly by the grace of God at this point, some of my coworkers at my job had a friend who got sucked into WMSCOG and he helped pull that person out. And then here I am, another coworker of his, getting leaving another Korean cult at the time, Shincheonji. And when I told him about it, he actually said, "Chris, I understand what you're going through, and I'm here to help." I got incredibly lucky with that. Of all the places, the guy to my right on my coding job, turns out that he helped another person leave a Korean cult. I got incredibly lucky. And some of the things that he said was, Chris, be careful about visiting and talking to them because they still have their emotional hooks in you. You're still feeling emotional and raw, and understandable. You know what I mean? Because I mean, you just spent 10 plus, or sorry, I didn't spend 10 plus years, assuming that you just spent X number of years or X number of months studying the Bible with a new way that you've never seen before. And you're going to have those close attachments. So sometimes it's better to keep their distance from them. And like I already kind of said, what will probably likely happen is a flood of text, a pressure to explain or return, and emotional manipulation is almost always common. Okay, so let me go ahead and talk about that. The pressure to explain. You do not owe anyone anything. Okay, let me repeat that. You do not owe them anything. When you leave, you had to remember, most likely you had the wisdom of hiding used against you when you were being recruited and indoctrinated into this group. So if you do want to have an explanation, you can send them a text saying, this is a very neutral, objective, and factual set of texts saying, this is why I'm leaving, because here are the factual biblical or fulfillment issues, etc. Now, as you know, SEJ will immediately view that as poison, and they'll immediately view that as persecution because SEJ, unfortunately, and other high control groups are afraid of factual information that goes against their narrative. They're going to get angry when they hear that. But I mean, judging by their very, how do I say, I mean, they're afraid of a subreddit, guys. They're afraid of google.com. They're going to be afraid of a former member who actually lived and breathed the cults and understands their doctrines to a degree. They're going to do everything in their power to discredit you because they're afraid of you. And for emotional manipulation, I mean, just being excommunicated alone is a terrible thing to feel and to have to go through and experience, which is why earlier I made a big, heavy emphasis on ensuring that you at least have that emergency contact list. If you don't have a family member or a friend to talk with, you have me. You have Pastor Yang, you have the others. And I may not be able to always respond right away, but I'll try my best. And not only will I try my best, in the future, probably next month or so, I plan on having more community get-togethers where we can all hang out on Zoom. Or hey, if you're in Seattle, I mean, I'll be happy to meet you in person. We could go hang out in a coffee shop or whatever you want. And I'm here to listen and be your friend. And if not, I mean, I know some pastors in Atlanta, I know ex-members in California who probably would be down to hang out with you and talk with you. But right now I'm figuring out the logistics. So stay tuned. So yeah, I already talked about this. So again, I think the most important thing is making sure that you hold boundaries. Okay. This is another thing that I had to learn over the last few years of being free from the Shincheonji cult. Boundaries. I suck at saying no. I like helping people, but then what normally happens is I overcommit. Now in Shincheonji, they completely tore down every single boundary that he had because if you said no to Shincheonji or their leadership, it meant that you're saying no to God. They may not always say that directly, but they certainly infer it, especially since, Shincheonji is the kingdom of heaven and the leadership above you was placed directly from God. However, saying no is not a sin. Jesus also said no. Jesus also had time for himself. He would escape the crowds and recover and sleep and rest and eat. If Jesus can do that, so can you. There's nothing wrong with saying no. It's not sinful, it's not rude. And we already talked about the unannounced locations and visits. And talking about the police report earlier in this video, I already talked about like when to file. Tell it to them first verbally, file it then, or better yet, that this is the last resort. If you need to do this, only if they show up and continue showing up unannounced and harassing you. This is ultimately about your safety, right? Shincheonji is not a violent group. They're not going to do anything physical to you, but the idea is that here's a person that's showing up unannounced to your life. That, sometimes it's just better to be like, hey, I just want to be left alone. I found that 99.999% of the time for any of these groups, if you tell them, hey, I am not interested, please leave me alone, they'll just leave you alone. But you will have to verbally take that stand. So self-protection is not hostility. Okay, so this is the idea of talking about boundaries yet again. It's something that actually will help you heal. Saying no to other people or saying, yes, I'll get to that at another time. It is okay. It's okay to say no. It's okay to rest. It's okay to take a break. Okay, so you left. You went through the drama of them flooding you, calling you, showing up unannounced. Okay, people are now starting to leave you alone. Great. Okay, I remember after all that, I remember looking at my schedule. And it went from 7 days a week of Shincheonji activities to kind of like, oh, well, now I have a lot of free time. I remember on a side tangent, there's a movie called Madagascar and Madagascar penguins. Their whole thing was to go to Antarctica. And then when they arrived, they're just kind of like, huh, now what? They kind of said that, it's like, well, this kind of sucks. That's how you'll feel. Because now that you have free time, now that you have the freedom to finally just kind of breathe and relax, you're going to be like, okay, whoa, did I make the right choice? That's when the thoughts of doubts and second guessing will really start to be amplified. That's when you go down back to your handwritten notes of why you decided to leave. And then you're going to review those notes. And then you're going to go on websites like Closer Look Initiative and really just go through all the different articles that have been written to really help you with your psyche being like, okay, hey, there are doctrinal issues, there's theological issues, there's psychological, there are fulfillment issues. There's a treasure trove, a mountain of evidence against cults like Shincheonji, even the World Mission Society Church of God. So you're going to feel disoriented. So this is where you're going to also do another important step. You're going to try to find therapy and professional support. You should ideally do this when you're making your list of contacts. However, there's been times where people understandably were like, okay, first I need to focus on leaving, then I'll feel out everything else. Regardless, trying to find a professional therapist who specializes in spiritual abuse is going to be worth their weight in gold. That's what I did. And doing that helped me speak with a professional to help me kind of, how do I say, break down how and why I was indoctrinated into this group, considering in my past and my present and all these other things. And it helped me kind of not only make sense of everything, but also help me heal. And then let's say that you can't find a therapist who actually specializes in control and cult therapists. Well, there's a lot of overlap with abuse frameworks. I'm talking about like the was it the power wheel cycle that people in abusive relationships have. When I was actually talking to my brother about Shincheonji, he actually said it really well. He said, Chris, what you went through was an abusive relationship. When I explain this to other people who clearly never went through this, especially therapists, I always say, okay, if you understand what an abusive relationship is like, that will be a good way of articulating the people who don't know or don't understand so that they can at least get a glimpse of what it's like. And then other ways of articulating your viewpoint. It's important to articulate what you went through so that then when you say it and verbalize it, you can continue the process of healing, continue doing research on specific keywords from a psychological and theological viewpoint. So you went through emotional abuse, coercive control, manipulation. These terms will help people who may not know what it's like to go through a cult at least have an understanding of, okay, I can at least have an idea of how to help you, especially from a professional perspective. So, other words that you should look up: trauma bonding, gaslighting, identity erosion, and fear based control. When you start to research these different terms, then what's also going to open up is, oh, guess what? There are other people who went through either the same thing as me or similar things as me. Then, as you continue doing your homework, you can kind of piece together a roadmap, either with a professional, with a friend, or whoever, to then continue helping you with the healing process. Your process is going to be different from my process, from anyone else's process. I can only give you general rules. You can email me. I'll be more than happy to go on a Zoom call with you. But generally speaking, I'm trying to give you the tools so that you yourself know how to heal and continue healing. So, afterwards, another thing to keep in mind is you're going to go through the cycle of grief. So, you're going to be grieving. More specifically, you're going to be grieving a lost promise. You were sold a world changing vision. For Shincheonji, HWPL, you're bringing heaven here on earth. You're going to be, trying to bring peace among the nations. Or that in Revelation 21:4, there will be no more death, crying, or mourning, or pain. And how do I say? Death will be absolved in Shincheonji, or World Mission Society Church of God. You could be the one of the 144,000, where you're going to become like a creator or whatever. They have their own 144,000 eschatology, which is interesting. But regardless, you were sold a lie, and you are now going to grieve a promised future that never came about. So I listed out the stages of grief. Again, I highly recommend go do your homework on these key terms. I'll be going in greater detail in future videos about this. This is an overview for you, the member who just left. You're going to have a lot of free time. You might also start also doing the homework on this as well. So the stages of grief include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. This is not going to be a linear order. This is not going to be a one-time stop. It's going to be a continuous acceptance and grief of losing your identity. When I was going through it, I didn't really go through the denial phase, to be honest with you. From my perspective, I already kind of knew, okay, yeah, ICJ's a cult. But to go in a little bit greater detail, there's going to be the identity collapse. Your whole identity for the last few years is, I'm a Shincheonji member. I'm a World Mission Society Church of God member. And then all of a sudden, poof, that's gone. There's going to be betrayal trauma. The idea is this: you felt like you were in the highest truth of whatever, whether it's keeping Passover, whether you have the highest truth in the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, whatever the case may be. Then you kind of realize that you were systematically lied to. There's going to be moral injury, especially for Shincheonji. They heavily use the wisdom of hiding. And then you're going to realize, oh, wow, I used that. Now, for me personally, to kind of overcome that feeling of guilt, I actually called everybody who I interacted with and tried to recruit, and I told them the truth. I told them that, listen, I lied to you and I am sorry. I take full ownership of it. And surprisingly, everyone actually responded pretty well in the sense of feeling hurt, of course, but they appreciated it. That may not be always the case. They do not, their forgiveness of you, you're not entitled to that. But you can at least be open and honest with the people that you may have lied to and said, listen, I lied to you and I am sorry. And over the last few years of your life, at least, or whether it's center, whether it's a few years, whether it's decades, you're continuously told that if you leave, you're going to go to hell. If you leave, you're going to go to hell. That's not true, for one. And then for two, I mean, I'm going to go through the theological reasons as to why that's not true in the future. But as for two, it's pretty clear at this point that SEJ, WIMSCOG, that they are categorically false. So you're going to have to continue learning how to just accept the fact and remind yourself with the handwritten notes why it's false. Because when you feel like, oh no, I'm betraying God, but then you're right, then you go back to the reasons why you're not betraying God, because theologically they're wrong, prophecy fulfillment are wrong, and etc., you're going to feel better. This is going to be your anchor point in reality. The social loss is a real impact, and no matter what, it's going to suck. But here's another way of looking at it. This is an opportunity for you to start over and rebuild a friend group, either doing hobbies or religious activities, whatever, in a healthier dynamic. And that's something that you can kind of remind yourself as well. Now, I'm talking about on a high level broad view. Let's go on to everyday choices. So healing happens every day. Okay, so what does that actually mean? When I first left SCJ, what I did was, after writing it all down and reviewing my notes and maybe even obsessively reading the subreddit and watching videos online, I told myself, okay, I need to do other stuff. So other stuff included, okay, well, I would like to actually continue working out. So is there a gym close by that I can go to, or a park? And so I wrote down, okay, let's go find a gym. And that's what I did every other day for a few years, actually, at least for the cardio and etc. Then another thing I kind of told myself was, okay, well, I would like to grow out a beard. Hey, there you go. SCJ, they don't like beards. And then another thing I kind of told myself was, hey, I want to speak out. So I gave myself at least 6 to 7 months of healing, and then I publicly spoke out. My first video was on Great Light Studios with Jordan. And so through that, I just made small goals and worked towards them. Sometimes with some people who I've interacted with, they're so depressed that I tell them, okay, your goal for today is just to get out of bed, and you're going to tell yourself that's a big win. Other things I always recommend people to do is rebuild your finances. Focus on your career, because you have to pay your bills. So whether it's going back to school for nursing or engineering or whatever, the idea is that you're in the world, you have to pay your bills, you need to be a responsible steward. And then if you continue making these goals, smart goals that are small and achievable and everyday small things, like maybe even cooking a meal for yourself, if you do things like that, then over time, in 6 months, you're actually going to become a better person. You're going to continue healing. So another thing I highly recommend that you do is resting. You were just sleep deprived for 6 to 8 months, or not even 6 to 8 months. You were sleep deprived for multiple years. Catch up on sleep. That'll be their number one thing that you need to do. Learn how to go to bed consistently at a proper time. I know this is silly, but these are practical steps that you need to take. I know that this is redundant. People are going to be like, what the heck? But you have to remember, a lot of times I remember having midnight meetings in Shincheonji. Like, what the heck? Right? And it's because they're trying to sleep deprive you so that they can control you. Basic nutrition and self-care, learning how to say no, and continue creating a simple, flexible schedule. Now, as you continue doing this, when it comes to returning to Christ or Christianity, that choice is yours. For those who are interested, and I would encourage this, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You join this Bible study, whether it's SCJ or WIMSCOG, in an honest and sincere attempt to know who God is. And I know it's going to be a lot. And What I always tell people is this: you just escaped an abusive relationship. It's okay to take a break from relationships. It's okay to maybe for a moment focusing on your physical and mental and emotional health first before trying to jump straight into a church. Some people are able to jump straight into a church. Other people, like myself, I needed to take a short break. But one thing I told myself was I want to take the time to build, not only rebuild my foundation, but also know who and what God is. What is this Christianity about? One of the things that a lot of people don't get is because you're so indoctrinated with fear, going back to church is actually really hard. You have to remember, even if you're in a center class for a year, almost every day in that center class, you're told that Christianity is Babylon. If you're in WMS or SEJ as a full-time member, I mean, it's even worse. It's as if, because you're told and reminded every day that the pastors are married to Satan, that if you were to return, that you are a dog returning to his own vomit. However, clearly that's not true. I mean, if you go through the Closer Look Initiative website, there are articles about betrayal, destruction, salvation, and how there's verses like Matthew 16:18 that on this rock, Jesus will build spiritual Israel, and that the gates of Hades will not overcome it, meaning that Christ won't just allow his church to fall, that he won't allow his sheep to be abandoned for 2,000 years. I mean, logically, that doesn't make sense, because if you think about it, Jesus is described as the good shepherd. So you're telling me that the good shepherd will allow his people to be in spiritual darkness for 2,000 years just so that he can set up the tabernacle temple in 1966 to a group of 7 men in Guachon just so that they can betray a year later. I mean, how ridiculous does that sound? So when it comes to going back to church, take your time. You're going to feel panic attacks. You're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm betraying God. And it's not just Shincheonji. WMS members, I've noticed, felt the same way. A lot of different ex-cult members across the board feel the same way. And so through that, even if you just step foot, try to set up a time with a pastor, talk with that pastor, see how he responds. And if he responds as a good shepherd supposed to respond, of care and love and gentleness, then you found yourself a good church. Go to that church, and even if you only step foot once and you need to just take a break and step away, that's okay. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And then for scripture, the idea is this. Now, this stream right now isn't going to be about, how do I say, all the biblical issues of Shincheonji, but I can at least start out with some of the basics. What Shincheonji and World Mission Society Church of God did is that they made a Bible and the New Testament point to someone else other than Jesus. It's going to be something about like Jesus plus something else, whether it's Passover, whether it's needing to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, this Gnostic secrecy of the parables and etc. And it's no longer about what Christ did on the cross. And what I'm thinking is I can maybe start going through Revelation 1 real quick to kind of show the ridiculousness and the absurdity of Shincheonji. So let's see here, share screen. On Bible Hub over here, what I'm going to quickly go over is this. Revelation 1:7. Look, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierce him. So Shincheonji, what they do is let me start with this caveat. We all agree, yes, Book of Revelation, we're not supposed to take it literally in the sense of there's not a literal beast of 7 heads and 10 horns coming out of the ocean or the sea. We can all agree with that. However, what Shincheonji does is they take this metaphorical language and add an extra layer, secret Gnostic parable, or not parables, metaphorical language that is exclusive to them because they say so. And then they add beyond what the text is saying. So when it comes to reapproaching the Bible, the first question you have to ask yourself is this: who and what are the target audience? Well, it's the first century Christians. A lot of these first century Christians would have a Jewish understanding of the Old Testament, especially. And so when a Christian would read, look, he is coming with the clouds, the first thing they would think of is in Daniel 7:13. So when we go to Daniel 7:13, We can see the following. In my vision at night, I looked, and before me was like a son of man, coming in the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. So the idea is this: when a person in the first century would read this, he would understand that this Son of Man is in reference to Jesus, and that Revelation 1:7 is in reference to Daniel 7:13. It has nothing to do with Jesus being an invisible spirit creature and that he'll return in secret, but instead it has everything to do with the power and glory of Jesus, who is being exalted at the right hand and approaching the Ancient of Days, which is the Father. Has nothing to do with a secret second coming where you need to have eyes of perception, but instead it's about who Jesus is. And then what about every eye will see him, even those who pierced him? So let's go to Isaiah 53 real quick. So in Isaiah 53, it explains why Jesus was pierced. But he was pierced for our transgressions, and he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. So the idea is this: the reason why Jesus was, pierced and hung on the cross is because of our sins. So when you're doing this, when you're reading this, you have to keep that context in mind. So who pierced Jesus? Every sinner on this earth. And what is Daniel 1:7? Is it a secret, hidden, how do I say, spiritual return? The whole point of Daniel 1:7 is, who is Jesus? He's the Son of Man who received all glory, honor, and praise, who died for our sins, and every eye will see him. Also means the idea that when Christ returns, those who sinned, we are the reason why Christ is pierced on the cross. And so another thing I also want to point out in Revelation is the following. Let's go through this. In Revelation 1, especially chapter 1, verses 5, let's go here. And from Jesus Christ, who's a faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth, to him who loves us and freed us from our sins by his blood and made us to be a kingdom of priests. So a few things to keep in mind. One, when in the verse I just read, is there anything about needing to know a future secret hidden doctrine? No. Instead, it's about what Christ did on the cross. And this is why he has freed us from our sins from his blood and made us to be a kingdom of priests. So this was written to Christians 2,000 years ago. And then in 1 Peter 2:9, it says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. So this letter is being written to Christians 2,000 years ago. It has nothing to do with Shincheonji. I'm bringing this up because I'm looking at it from a psychological view of how to heal in your everyday steps that you can take, and also from a biblical perspective. In this, what I'm trying to show you is you don't need a secret hidden ring decoder to understand the book of Revelation. You instead may need to know a little bit of historical context, and maybe instead of needing to add this secret hidden promise of the new John, which doesn't exist. Through that, you can not only reapproach the Bible, you can also reapproach your life. If you have any more questions and you don't want to ask in the comment section, that's okay. Feel free to reach out to me in my email. The email's in the description of the channel. So the next thing is, let's go through some questions, okay? So what happened internally in yourself when you were helped out, and how did you finally wake up? Okay, yeah, so it was a process. The best way to describe my wake up process was I always felt like there are two selves to the Chris. There's the indoctrinated Chris, and then there's the authentic Chris. One of the best books to read on cult indoctrination and what it's like to be a cult member, honestly, would be Stephen Hassan's Combating Mind Control. He did a great job articulating what it's like to be in this situation. I felt as though there was always a form of Chris that was fighting and arguing, being like, nope, this is the truth. I need to just fight and overcome. And then there's the authentic Chris screaming at the top of his lungs saying, Chris, you were just systematically lied to for an entire year in a Bible study. What makes you think that they're not lying to you right now? And then let's go through it. Let's see here. How do former Shincheonji members cope with the impact of having to be lied? Yeah. So what I did was I called up everybody who I lied to and took full ownership of it. I mean, I knew immediately that the right moral thing to do was to own up to the lie that I said. And that's pretty much what I did. And if you can't do that, if you don't have the luxury of doing that, it's okay. This is another important thing. You're going to have to learn how to forgive yourself. Okay. What I mean is this: you are indoctrinated into a group. In order to forgive yourself, you first take full ownership of what you did. Even if you're indoctrinated, it still had results of harming others. You had to say, yes, I did harm others, and I am sorry. That's why I called everybody who I harmed. And then afterwards, just tell yourself, okay, you did everything in your power to make amends, and there's nothing else that you can do. So if you tell yourself this over and over again, it'll get better. And then for those who are so religious and Christian, if the God in the universe can forgive you, you can forgive yourself. And then other things, did it continue lying and guilt? Long-term consequences. Okay, so I think what you're trying to kind of get at is what are the consequences of lying, even for a Shincheonji member? Okay, so for one, for those who are in SEJ using the wisdom of hiding extensively or unextensively, the problem that SEJ they don't seem to get is if you're going to redefine what a lie is and then have it heavily use it, and historically SEJ, there's been a lot of well-documented use cases from all over the world of SEJ doing this, right? Infiltrating churches, lying, etc. The long-term consequence is, why should we trust anything that you say? How do I know that right now SCJ for their total numbers? They're now claiming that I have 1 to 2 million members because they allegedly recruited pastors. Okay, well, in the past, you have been caught on multiple occasions to inflate your numbers and to straight up lie about other things when it comes to recruiting. Why should we trust your numbers today? And then for long-term behavior, I believe it's First Timothy, where it talks about how you have seared your conscience. If you lie enough and think to yourself that you're doing this for the greater good, you eventually will grow numb to it. I do believe it's First Timothy. Let's see here, chapter 4. And then, so when they leave SEJ, do they feel cursed, and how did they get over that fear? So, okay, that's a very good question. I believe it's Matthew chapter 12, verses 43 to 45, and the 7 evil spirits. Okay, so for one, I will go do a deeper dive theologically of how that verse is butchered by these cults. But here is a fact. Go review other testimonies from different cults, World Mission Society, Jehovah's Witnesses, LDS, whatever. And you're going to see a repeating pattern of people feeling traumatized after leaving a cult. So if SEJ is the highest truth and you leaving results in you being tormented, the logical fallacy with that would be, then why is it that the other groups and other ex-members of different groups feel the same exact way? And why is it that psychologically we can actually do a scientific mapping, more or less, of what you can expect when you leave a traumatic experience? So SEJ conducts extensive ceiling exams, and SEJ so for those who actually got kicked out, I never actually directly experienced this, people actually being kicked out. I think they do that more of like, you better get your act together and you better do well. What they do say, though, is at the end, there's going to be a separation inside of SEJ, and that these test scores may or may not influence whether or not you're a sheep-like believer or a goat. And so they use these various metrics to kind of scare you in submission. Now, I mean, okay, I was hearing this back in 2020. It's like 2026 already. You know what I mean? Like, it's funny. On a side note, I remember in 2019 how I was told, okay, the door is closing. You know, it's almost done. Everything's about to be complete. But I mean, what, it's been like 7 years now, like, and they're still doing the same thing, more or less. They maybe changed things slightly, but they're still doing the same tactics of how do I say, deception. And then why is SCJ afraid of people going to therapists to deal with mental health issues? And are the leaders okay? So for your first question, so the therapists would, if they're trained, would clearly see through the manipulation of what you're going through. My actually, funny enough, when I joined SEJ, I actually went to a therapist because it turns out my ex girlfriend was there, and that really hurt me, right? So of course I was like grieving over that. My therapist is smart. He didn't directly confront me, but instead he already started planting the seeds of asking me questions about like, why is it that you can't even tell me the name of the group? And he would kind of point out a lot of red flags, being like, hey, as your professional therapist, I do want to, point out some red flags that you have to look at. And are the leaders trained to deal with mental health issues? No, no, absolutely not. From my experience, no. There are everyday people like you and I who've been indoctrinated into a high control group, and SEJ, they like to have double standards. They say that they care about your health until it gets in the way of doing God's work, and then they'll normally say that you need to fight and overcome. And that's why, like, I recall back in 2020, before SEJ accidentally shut down South Korea, your health didn't matter. It was no longer an excuse. And instead, you had to either recruit or, and it was no longer an excuse to like say, hey, I'm feeling sick. In order for you to not do SUJ related activities, they would either guilt you or shame you or pressure you if you were to miss, right? And it wasn't until we accidentally spread COVID in Korea and accidentally shut down the country, right? That was when SUJ kind of did a complete 180. And what they did was they started taking pictures of us cleaning the center class and all this other stuff. Mind you, I recall the center instructor coughing and feeling sick and still moving forward, because we needed to teach the word of God. And instead, it showed that they didn't really care. They would kind of make an emphasis on being a living sacrifice. So now, if they didn't care about your physical health, what makes you think that they would care about your mental health? They didn't, because it was all about bringing forth the kingdom of heaven and the kingdom of God. And they try to kind of frame it as if it's like, oh, well, logically speaking, this is what we need to do. But if they were truly logical, they wouldn't be afraid of online criticism, right? They wouldn't try to straw man every argument. An example of SUJ straw manning the Christian argument is try to get your instructor to talk about the Trinity. I mean, just say that. I mean, a lot of their arguments against the Trinity are pretty horrible. I'm just going to be very honest with you. But hey, point aside, So I think I just went through most, if not all, the questions. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to just contact me. Now, for those who are leaving and those who just recently left, I can tell you this. Things will get better, I promise. The first week kind of sucks. Let's just call it as it is. This is not a fun process, okay? Like, you're going to feel angry, you're going to feel sad, you're going to feel depressed, you're going to grieve a loss of a dream in your identity. But I promise you, things will get better. Hold on to that hope. And then when you're ready, there's always don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a reason why Christianity's been around for 2,000 years. Despite the strawmans of SEJ, I just had to admit the leadership of SEJ, they really don't seem to know much about the theology of Christianity. It's ironic because they always critique people who speak out against them. Oh, they don't know what they're talking about. But name me one time where they actually tried to, at least attempted to, fairly represent Christ in Christianity. So things will get better. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I briefly touched on the book of Revelation. In the next episode, I'll continue the journey of not only how to heal, but also how to read the Bible again. And I mean, it doesn't take much of a biblical scholar to see through their deception. Anyways, I'm Chris, Exposing Cults. That's the live. I hope to continue this cadence of every other week. I'll upload some videos of former members who had the courage to speak out. And I hope that this live was helpful, and God bless.